Hello and welcome to another episode of the CEO Peak. I am Dave Osh, and the CEO Peak Show selects CEOs who lead teams that individually and collectively build the capacity and capability to create outcomes that matter most for the organization and the society in high disruption and complexity. Such a leader is our guest today, Dan Vetras, the CEO of Kollective, the leading independent provider of enterprise content delivery networking infrastructure. Kollective's cloud-based software platform leverages existing network infrastructure to deliver content faster, more reliably, and with less bandwidth. Dan is actively involved in understanding the needs of Kollective's global customer base, building a world-class team, and driving an agile and innovative culture. He has 30 years of successful experience in business and technology leadership, including 3 previous CEO positions at Visible Technology, Talisma, and Captura, as well as executive sales positions at IBM and Lotus. Hello, Dan, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity to tell the Kollective story. No pun intended. Our Kollective is with a K.
And your story as well. I think that you have an amazing story, and I don't know, but it looks like you are the most experienced CEO that we have here. Like that, this is your 4th position, so I'm sure we can learn a lot from you. So, let's start with COVID-19. And the most common question that everybody is asked is how COVID-19 affected you.
So I probably will answer this in an atypical format. I can say all the normal things like I haven't traveled since February, and it's the longest I've stayed in one place in my entire business career. But most recently, I had not one, but 2 of my children elope. And the reason they did that is they were tired of canceling weddings this year and even thinking about having them next calendar year. So on September 12th, my middle daughter, Haley, married her fiance, Haj, in Tulum, Mexico, with just the 2 of them attending. And then last Saturday on October 10th, my youngest, my son, Alex, married his fiance, Zoe, in Sleepy Hollow, New York, which is about 30 minutes outside of Manhattan where they live. So as I've told some friends, I may be the answer to a trivia question in that what dad do you know that's had 2, not 1, but 2 children elope within 30 days of each other, and he nor none of his family could go to the wedding in person? Weddings, I should pluralize that.
That's, I think, the biggest impact, this is weddings that you won't forget, even though you won't attend, right?
Exactly. And we will throw parties for them next year on the West Coast and the East Coast, but that's an unknown right now as to when. But yeah, it's been an interesting month for sure.
That's an amazing story to start with. So Dan, you have been playing team sports for many years. And in fact, you play basketball with your son on the same team, making kind of a very unique 2-generation basketball team. So what did you learn from sports which you applied in the corporate world?
Well, I think the single biggest thing you learn is how to cooperate with people with different backgrounds, different thinking. You have practices that are mundane and repetitive, and everybody wants to play in a game, but not many people really want to put the work in to prepare for the game. I call it the 3 Ds: dedication, discipline, and desire. Those things come into effect every time you step on a field or a court or an ice rink, etc. I look at many of the teams I played on and how mixed they were racially and how easy it all appeared for us to get along back then. This was a while ago, obviously. I'm talking back in the 70s and early 80s, but it's just the ability to coexist with people that you may have nothing in common with other than the common goal of winning, coming out on top at the outcome of whatever that particular event is you're participating in, and doing it in the most genuine way possible without an agenda. And everybody plays a role, and particularly in team sports, you are tasked to do a certain thing. And if you do it well and everybody else does, the team wins. And if you make a mistake, your teammates have two choices. They can either get down on you and make it even more challenging, or they can support you through that mistake, as you do in life and as you should do in business, because nobody bats 1,000 at anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that everybody plays a role, but sometimes in teams we need to cover other people's roles. Mm-hmm. So how this shift happened, that sometimes people get out of their specific roles in teams to be part of a team beyond their functional role?
There's no doubt you are often asked to play a different position than the one that you were originally assigned. I've had to do that multiple times through my career as an athlete. And I would also make the point now that, while I was never the best athlete on the team, I always felt like I was the best teammate I could be. And those could be two different things. And maybe because I came to grips with that early in my life, that I could play a contributing role without being the superstar necessarily, it just made it easier for me to adapt. And when a coach in particular asks you to do something different, just like in business, you have two choices. You can either go with that and put your best effort in, or you can say no. And as a result, it's not only bad for the team, but it's a poor reflection on you too, as an individual.
Yeah. So when you build teams, how do you build this team camaraderie?
Well, I think and I'll shift over to the workplace. I mean, I think it's consistent communication, treating people with the respect that everybody wants, being humble and having humility. I find that being self-deprecating in front of all of my teammates, and I mean everybody in the company, makes me more genuine, more approachable. As I told one of my executives the other day, it's one thing to say you have an open door policy. It's something completely different to do it. And it's easy to say that person doesn't deserve the time, or you're too busy. But accessibility is huge, and transparency. And that's another word that gets thrown around, I know, quite a bit these days. But people will be able to tell what kind of leader you are within the first 90 days of you joining any company. I've come in, and as you mentioned, this is the fourth time I've come in to take over. In the three previous ones, it was for a founder. And I have a joke that when I do finally write my book at the end of all this, the title is going to be, I'm not smart enough to start a company, but I'm dumb enough to run one. Because those are two completely different things. And to come in and be the person that's going to help move it from being engineering and product driven to being very sales and customer driven, that's not always met with the best response. So you have to sell yourself internally to people that had a great idea when they began the company, but now you want to bring it to a much different plane in terms of revenue and growth. And so back to your original question, it's the communication, it's the camaraderie, and it's just being yourself.
Yeah. You mentioned that it will take them 90 days to assess the CEO and decide what a leader he is or she is, right? Mm-hmm. But it will take you also 90 days or even less to assess their leadership capacity.
I just gave this advice to somebody the other day. I don't think anybody should come into any organization and start making changes right away. I think the best way to approach that is to meet with as many people as you possibly can, make that at least a 2, if not 3-month process. Listen more than you talk. These are obviously cliches that everybody's heard before. But if somebody comes in and just starts flipping the apple cart over, to use a metaphor, on day one, it's going to make everybody unstable and be worried about what their role and position is. Now, you will eventually have to do that in some capacity, But I've always thought, come in, learn as much as you can, listen more than you talk, and give it at least 2 to 3 months before you make any kind of real dramatic change.
What if the highest performing executive on a team is a toxic executive? What
Yeah, well, that can happen in our industry. We have a lot of very, very smart people with high IQs and maybe not as high EQs or emotional quotation. I'm a big believer in EQ. I'd like to have both. I'd say I'm a higher EQ than I am IQ personally. I do think that allows me to build good teams. So to answer the question directly, I don't think there's a lot of room for high performers who are toxic. Maybe as individual contributors, maybe in a sales role in a region where they don't interact with as many people as they would in headquarters or in functions that are cross-functional in the way that they work day to day. But even then, they're going to have to rely on people back at headquarters to help them, whether that's engineering or product or marketing. So I don't have a lot of tolerance for people that are toxic, and I don't necessarily think that you get as much out of them as you do with somebody with maybe please take this the right way, a lower IQ. Everybody has high IQs in our industry, but somebody who may not be as smart, but has a tremendous work ethic and is willing to take coaching. I would take that any day over a high-end performer that is also very high maintenance with that.
Yeah. One of my toughest moments years earlier was the same, to fire somebody which is really high performer, sales director, holds a lot of the accounts, and it's very tough. And it was toxic to low EQ, as you said.
Yeah, we've all had that at different levels. And I came through the sales ranks earlier in my career. So I saw a lot of egos, quite frankly. I would much rather have somebody with less of an ego, but is willing to work with everybody across the organization. Because even in sales, you are, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, but you are going to have to rely on others to help you accomplish the goal. And believe me, in large organizations, if they know you're a problem child, they will do their best to not help you and find ways to delay the answers or whatever it is that you're looking for, or the support for that matter.
So if you don't mind, let's switch gears to another impact of COVID-19. COVID-19 exposed domestic supply chain weaknesses and dependencies on foreign critical products. So there was kind of a shift from globalization to localization, which is already started before COVID-19 because the rise of nationalism around the world and so on. And Kollective, on the other hand, went global early. So would you mind sharing what was the logic behind it, the advantages, how difficult was it?
Sure. Well, in the previous 3 companies I ran, we did the same thing, and I always viewed it as a competitive advantage, despite some of the venture-backed investors who wanted to dominate a region or a market initially before they expanded, particularly outside of the U.S. I got the bug early in my career. I was fortunate enough to be an expat in the UK back in the 80s. And doing that, I worked with people from all over the world, and particularly across Europe, where I was based. And it just taught me how big the world is. I also, I've read books like The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman, like all of us have. And in one particular company I ran, we had a huge presence in Bangalore, India, with our own employees. We didn't outsource. Those are our people. And so I went there 3 to 4 times a year to understand and appreciate that part of the world and the culture. And I am convinced, particularly with COVID, and I'll give you some statistics, 2 quarters ago, the Asia Pacific region for us carried 63% of our bookings for the quarter. And we had just opened up there a couple of years earlier. So it was nowhere near as tenured as the North American, or the Americas, I should say, and the EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa markets. Yet they did well over half the business because there were a lot of countries that were still working or back to work or hadn't shut down completely for COVID. Last quarter, the EMEA market helped dramatically, as did the Americas, and we signed 20 new enterprise customers in the quarter, and they were representative of 10 different countries around the world. And I don't know anybody our size that could say something like that, because we only have 110 employees in the entire organization here. And while we only have a few in certain regions, they perform exceedingly well on a regular basis. And so my advice would be, don't listen to the logic that you have to go into one vertical and dominate it, or one region, usually the Americas, and dominate it. The world is your oyster, and it's actually helping us now, because now the Europeans are getting locked down again, while the Asian market's opening back up again. And the Americas, as we know, depends on what day of the week. But if we hadn't made that investment in going global as early as we had, this company would be in very difficult. It would be in a very difficult state right now.
Yeah. So you look at it like as a portfolio, that you diversify the portfolio, right?
Yeah, great point.
And mitigate the risk with when one. Yeah, it's exactly the same concept.
Mm-hmm.
One region performs lower than others, and then there's compensation. While if you're only in the United States and everything here is down, so you go to zero, and have some clients that went to zero. So yeah, that's a beautiful. How difficult was it to go for? Because like you, I meet a lot of CEOs that really afraid to take this step. They haven't been, they were not expats in overseas, so they don't have the feeling. What you will tell a CEO that struggle with the decision actually to go global?
Well, your first hire internationally, and let's just pick the European market, has to be somebody you can implicitly trust. You know, we're on the West Coast, we're in Oregon, that's 8 hours time difference from London, 9 to Paris and Munich as examples. And the head of our global sales organization, our senior VP of global sales, has worked with me in all 4 companies based in London. And I knew after the first company that I wanted him on the team any opportunity that I had myself going forward to run companies, because there's an implicit trust. We talk every single day somewhere between 6 a.m. and 6:30 Pacific time for just a quick catch up. And if we need to later in the day, we'll do that as well. So my first advice would be, you may not get it right the first time, but if you find somebody that you really trust, hang on to them, and then make an effort on a daily basis, not at 10 o'clock their time at night, because that's insulting, quite frankly. When you wake up, whether that's on the East Coast, 5-hour difference, or the West Coast of America, 8-hour difference, make that your first phone call of the day. I will also say that the person running the Asia Pacific region has worked for me before in a different company. The person who runs EMEA sales, reports into the head of global sales, has worked with me before. The person who runs the Americas out of Atlanta has worked with me before. So, you maintain a network of those, again, that you feel comfortable with and that you can trust. But the first international hire is going to be a critical one. And then, COVID aside, if you're not willing to get on a plane and show them that you want to learn their business, and when I say that, it's not their business as in the company's business, but their business in that region, because regions are different and people sell and buy and market in particular differently by region around the world. So if you're not willing to get on a plane and take that long flight to Singapore, or that flight to the UK, and then when you're in Europe, bounce around and do the classic 3 countries in one day, breakfast in one, lunch in another, and dinner in a third, which is the way it works over there, then they're not going to respect you as their leader, because you're not willing to come into their territory and understand what they're dealing with, the goods and the bads, on a daily basis. And then the other thing I always did once we built teams is take the whole team out to dinner at least one night a week while I was over there. There are reasons why you're jet lagged, or you should be with clients, which we do that too, but always wanting to bring the local team out for a dinner and let them just talk about what's on their mind.
Yeah. And it's so fulfilling, isn't it?
Oh, I learned something every time we do this, and then we can, the conversation ultimately moves to sports or politics, hopefully more sports than politics these days, but it's just a great way. In fact, I was telling my wife the other day, the single biggest thing I miss about COVID, or I miss about traveling or not traveling during COVID, is I feel like I'm losing my edge culturally, because when you're in a different country, I always read the local newspapers as long as they're in my language. And if not, I have somebody help translate for me. I want to know what those people are experiencing where they live in their lives on a daily basis, which again, I mentioned before, it's why I read the Financial Times on a regular basis. It's the most global newspaper that I've found ever.
Yeah, I share the same feeling. I think now I'm going to quote you. I'm losing my cultural edge too. Dan, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Any final words that you want to share with the audience?
The more you bring people together, even if it's through Teams, Microsoft Teams, or Zoom, the better off you're going to be. And I learned at least 20 years ago when I read a business book, if you think you're communicating effectively, take it up by a factor of 100 to 1,000%, because nobody is outstanding at it. You can all use improvement, or we can all use improvement.
Yeah. You brought so many beautiful and insightful knowledge and experience today. Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you for watching the show.